Done. We are live.
Good.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and giving the overwhelming response to C2B Coach live on Facebook and YouTube. Recently, a young celebrity and very young TikToker committed suicide. So, this has forced us to take clinical depression seriously and look for solutions. My name is Meenakshi Rathore, and I am founder of C2B Coach. And I have been an IT professional for around 15 years now. And I have worked on various products and projects globally, mainly in banking and finance domain. And I'm very passionate about finding alternate therapies, which led me to here with you all for this event. And today I'm inviting Dr. David Lincoln, who is our guest today to talk about mental health. Dr. David Lincoln is president of ANLP India. He is renowned master trainer of NLP. He is a clinical psychologist with 40 years of experience in therapy. And he's author of several books as well. And he's sought after coach by senior executives and celebrities as well. So, Dr. David Lincoln, a warm welcome to you this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleased to be here.
So, Dr. Lincoln, would you like to share more about your life and work with our viewers?
Okay, sure. I I was going to say I started life at a very young age, but I think most of us started life at a very young age. But when I left university, this would have been around about 1969, with a degree in psychology. Never quite knew what to do in those days. And so what you tended to do if you were a degree is you went into teaching. And as I was very much into physical health, I was a mountain climber, a judo, and a few other
Oh,
sports. Obviously, I went in to become a PE teacher, as we called it, physical education. And I did that for a few years in secondary schools in Croydon, which is more or less where I was born in South London. And then I decided teaching wasn't for me, and I started to move into special education. I won't bore you with all the details, but that's dealing with naughty boys and girls is the easiest way of explaining it. And then from there, I got a greater interest into psychology and naturopathy, and in fact, went over to America and did training in both those subjects. And then around about 25, 30 years ago, I was sort of dragged screaming and shouting into NLP by a then girlfriend. She said, "You must come, you must come." And I went and did an evening and then a weekend, and eventually I did a practitioner and then and everything else. As they say, the rest is history. But in between, I'm doing this very quickly because in between all of that, of course, I was working as a consultant psychologist in Harley Street and did a little stint at the famous Hale Clinic. That's where Princess Diana went for her bulimia treatment. And so from there, I came to India nearly 18 years ago now, and I sort of stayed. And I've been here ever since. I sort of semi-retired from clinical work and thought I'd come over here part-time. And then there was a huge demand for NLP training and psychotherapy training, and psychology in general. So I just stayed here, and I've been here ever since. So there you have it, a quick potted history of David.
it's really interesting that you have traveled across the globe in a sense and visited diverse culture and experienced it, and then you settled down in India.
Yes, yes. Well, India has a lot going for it, and unfortunately, Indians themselves don't give enough credit to their own country. You got a lot of stuff going for you, and I think eventually, I just turned my phone off. Right, I think eventually you will become one of the top superpowers of the world. There's no doubt about that. But there you go.
That's wonderful. We need to realize our own power.
Exactly.
And Dr. David, for this event, I
Mhm.
was amazed that so many people shown interest. Around 500 plus people shown interest, and hundreds of them registered for this. So now it
Mhm.
reinforced my belief that people are interested to know about mental health and want to find solutions also for their challenges with daily life. So, what do you think about it? Because right now it's a very challenging time. COVID-19 is a pandemic, and everybody is going through different emotions. Even within a family, different people have different emotions, and their different mental fitness levels are there. So, what do you think about it?
Well, I think first of all, mental health per se is very badly understood throughout the world, not just in India, everywhere. And it's mainly because you could almost call it the hidden problem or the quiet or silent problem because you don't grow a big red nose or horns growing out of your head. Nobody noticed that there's anything wrong with you. But basically, mental health is our inability to control our environment and where we're living. I have to say that also one must understand there are two major types of mental health. One type, which we're not going to go too heavy onto tonight, is when there is a physical disorder with the organ called the brain. And that's when you have a growth or you have something missing or something deformed and so on. And all of that creates all sorts of very recognized mental disorders. Perhaps Mongolism and autism are two pretty well known versions of that. And definitely in the case of Mongolism, you can see it. And so there's no problem. The other side of the mental health is the way that we connect everything together in our head. I often like to call it as a thinking disorder. If your thinking creates what you want, then it's perfectly okay. But if your thinking doesn't create what it wants, then you are left missing some big part of your life. And this is the mental order, the mental disorders that most of us come across in everyday life. And it's categorized by, things like stress, depression, and so on. There's lots of different names that cover that. So we have to start with understanding there are two basic mental disorders: physical and what I suppose we call psychological. Right. So incorrect thinking, incorrect formation of the body. Those are the two main styles, and I think we have to uh, distinguish between those two to start off with. The
Yeah.
other, yeah, okay, the other big thing, and this is characterized in NLP because one of the major parts of NLP is what we call outcome. Is are you getting what you want? Are you getting enough money? Are you getting enough good relationships? Is your life happy? And if all that is yes, yes, I'm happy, I've got plenty of money, I've got good relationships, everything's going well, then we could say generally your mental health is quite sound. You're in control of your emotions. But if you answer that no, I'm not getting anything like I want, I'm miserable most of the time, I cry myself to sleep, I'm going in and out of relationships, I'm in and out of drugs or whatever, then we can say there's something wrong with the way you put things together. So we can look at somebody's outcome to determine whether they are mentally stable, I suppose, is a good way of putting it. Unfortunately, there's so many words and there's so many um, almost analogous sayings that people talk about mental health, and very few people, I don't think it's taught as a subject at school. So, nobody knows how to maintain a good, healthy mindset. I mean, you know how to brush your teeth and you know when to go and visit the doctor when you've got a stomach ache or something, but you don't know what to do when your thinking's a bit jumbled or a bit mixed up.
That's
So
so true, actually. That's so true. And that was, you answered a lot of my questions because I wanted to ask what is mental health and how somebody know whether they are mentally fit or not. So next
Well,
question it brings to me, are emotions and feeling, do they represent our mental health also?
yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we know a lot about emotions, except the most important thing, which is how to control them. We know how you get an emotion, the chemical that's made by your brain that flashes through your body and makes you feel sad or makes you feel excited. You know, there are good emotions and bad emotions, and the emotions are part of our defense mechanism in some extent. So, coming back to what you say, how do you know whether you're not working, if that's a good way of putting it? And really, you don't know so much. Other people know because your behavior changes. Now, your behavior can change drastically for all sorts of reasons. I mean, even in this COVID-19, a lot of us, our behavior has changed. We're not popping down to the shop and knocking on the next door neighbor and saying, "How are you?" and having cuddles and huddles with everybody. That's all changed. But we understand that and we're aware of it. But when your behavior changes and you're not aware of it, other people start saying, "Hey, you've changed." That's when you should start looking into having some professional advice. So I think it answers the question you asked a little bit earlier. But of course, emotions are often, if you lose control of your emotions, that's often a sign that things aren't going well. I mean, depression is an emotion. That's all it is. But when we all get a bit depressed. If you look at emotions on a line like this, right? Most of us are steady. We're on this line of almost no emotion, all right? And then something happens and we laugh. We go, hey, up on the emotional scale and back down again to the level. We don't stay up there. Otherwise, we, as we say in England, you're carted off to the funny farm because you're being so funny. You must be mad. Likewise, we all get a bit upset, a bit depressed. Oh, this is bad. And we tend to come back up again after a little while. So you can say that our emotions are only a problem when we're stuck either in a very down emotion or in a very up emotion, or also if we're having a roller coaster of emotions all the time, up and down. Now, sometimes these emotional problems can be physical, in the sense of, for example, depression is often the clinical depression is when there are some problems in manufactures of chemicals in your head. Other emotions can be created by, for example, an incorrect thyroid not functioning properly. You can have bad emotions created by side effects to ordinary medical interventions. I didn't like to say the word drugs, but medical interventions. So our emotions normally are stable. They go up and down according to our situation. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with going up and down. It's only wrong when you stick in one or the other, or of course use the wrong emotion at the wrong time. And that's what they currently call emotional intelligence, as the understanding of using the right emotion at the right time.
Ah, so what
So
is the
go
So
on.
actually, this is easily understandable that we feel all kind of emotions. We get angry also, we stressed out, and we are happy and sad. So it doesn't mean that we are stressed out, so we are depressed. If we are coming back to a normal state and feeling all the emotion, then it's fine.
Yes,
But we are,
normally, yeah.
if we are stay in a one particular emotion very long, then it becomes a problem. Is it?
That's right. That's right. And I think, the first thing you will notice, you see, how can I put this? The most mental problems or most disorders are not recognized by you, they're recognized by others. And when other people say, "Oh, you seem to be very stroppy, you're in a bad mood all the time, what's happening?" That is an indicator that something is going on. Now, sometimes these can be stimulated by past events, remembering bad things rather than remembering good things. You know, it was once said, I forget who said it now, but, you know, good health, when you are feeling good mentally and physically, could be described as remembered wellness. I'm remembering what I should do when I'm well, and then you become well. But when you become unwell in any reason, you've forgotten how to be well again. And that often is the case. I mean, I'm not talking about physical things now. You know, obviously, if I hit you over the head with a big lump of wood, you'll get a bump and maybe a broken bone or something, and that we need to deal with. But when it comes to the thinking, you don't notice it. And in fact, sometimes it can creep up on you. I know there are major times when it suddenly occurs, like what we call a nervous breakdown. And this is when, you know, it's like when the pot overboils. You know, the pot is boiling and it's simmering, and you're keeping the lid on it all the time, and you're keeping the lid on, and then suddenly it goes and goes everywhere. That's what we would describe as a nervous breakdown, and that often requires some hospitalization so you can calm down and get yourself working again.
This is something interesting. I was thinking that if somebody is depressed, person would know and go out for help. So now, if other people are noticing that your behavior is changing, so sometimes people don't listen to others, that they might be criticizing them. So how to use discretion and understand which feedback is the right one, and go for help.
Well, I think if you're helping other people, it's no use going up to them and sort of, yeah, you're doing this, you're doing that. You know, that doesn't get anybody anywhere. It just closes them down. But a good chat, you know, with somebody and saying, oh, have you noticed that this is not quite the way it used to be? What do you feel about that? You know, I mean, obviously, a chat with a professional is always a lot better. But, you know, we often, when we were talking about counseling and therapy, you know, one of the best therapists you have in your family is your grandmother or your grandfather, because they tend to just listen and listen, and you can say what you like, you know, because listening is something very important about therapy. You know, it's like, I can tell you, you know, there's not a lot of difference between emotional problems and physical problems. So let me give you a sort of a bit of a parallel here. Let's look at a smoker, you know, somebody who smokes cigarettes. So you might say to them, oh, you know, that smoking's not any good for you. Oh, it's right for me. You know, I'm okay. I'm Superman. And you carry on smoking, and you only rarely do something about it when you start coughing badly or your lungs start getting infected. And that's the same with drinking alcohol. You know, you can drink a little bit of alcohol. It has no effect on you. Drink too much, you get into a bad state. So, you know, your ups and downs of emotions are perfectly normal. But it's when they go wrong, but you don't notice it. You don't notice yourself staying just that little bit longer in a bad mood, or, you know, it's just not noticed by you. That's why other people notice it a lot better. But sometimes some people are so dogmatic that they're never going to accept it, you know. Thus the expression, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know, if you're walking around in, if I could say, happy misery, lead them to it, you know. And this is where it becomes so problematic. You see, in England, for example, we have the Mental Health Act, and various additions and alterations to it. And if a person, an individual, becomes a danger to themselves or to somebody else, they can be what's called sectioned under the Mental Health Act, put into hospital for 3 days to examine them and such forth. Now, you don't have such a thing here.
Yes.
So, I mean, I remember going to Delhi once, and as I was driving or being driven by the taxi, I saw a man in the middle of the road, stark naked, walking up and dancing. You know, now somebody like that in England would be immediately collected and deposited into the mental hospital for some examination. But here, nobody seems to take any notice. You know?
Yeah, so we have a long way to go regarding this actually. And that leads me to understand the difference between psychologist, psychotherapist, and counselors.
Um,
What is
it's
the
it's
difference
all,
between all of them?
it's very confusing, especially here. I
Yeah.
notice a lot. In America, it's very simply defined. So um, let's start, I suppose, at the top. And I used to say to my medical friends, I used to say, why do psychiatrists always feel that they're the best of all the doctors? Because psychiatry is a specialism of medicine. You have to be a medical doctor first, right? And these doctors used to say to me, oh, it's easy. It's because they work at the top. They work on the head. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor first and foremost, who's then decided to specialize in the organ called the brain, right? And similar to a cardiologist who specializes in the heart and a rhenologist with the kidneys and so on. And then even in psychiatry, there are divisions. You have neural psychiatry and all sorts of other. I'm not going to go into all those now, but psychiatrist is the top name for a medical doctor who specializes in the working of the brain. Now, a psychologist is somebody who studies people's behaviors. And the sort of thing you would say if you put 10 men in a room and throw a tiger in, what will they do? And 9 men will climb out the window and 1 man will be eaten by the tiger. So why isn't he eaten and why are the other 9 gone out? So we study behavior and what goes on. And so we create, if you like, a certain set of norms. So we understand what the person will do normally in a normal situation. Now, normal is a very complicated word because it's never as easy as just saying that. But by studying hundreds, if not millions of people, we know certain people will do certain things in certain situations. And a psychologist will write tests that show people doing all of this sort of thing and such forth. Now, coming down from psychologists, you would have the psychotherapist. Now, a psychotherapist is somebody who's been trained in all the psychological disorders and helps a client talk themselves through the problem. So they begin to understand the problem and then they begin to understand the solutions to the problem, guided by the therapist. Okay. Then coming down from the psychotherapist, you then have a counselor. And a counselor is just somebody who, for want of a better word, is a paid listener. They just listen. They don't give any advice or anything. And just the fact of listening helps a person to be able to get rid of all their problems. So that's the counselor. Now, in between that, there are lots of other things. I don't want to sort of say that's all there is. There are lots of other things. But the biggest problem is that every one of those, the psychologist, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and counselor, all, shall we say, dabble in the other person's job as well. You see, now a psychiatrist who feels they're at the top, very rarely, unless they're a good psychiatrist, will they say to their client, you must go and see a psychologist or you must go and see a psychotherapist. They want to do it themselves. And I think that's probably something to do with money. If you can keep the person there, you can get all the money from them. Whereas, as I said, in some countries, it's very clearly defined, all those differences. And then you've got all the other people, and I'm not going to say anything particular, but there are tens of thousands of different therapies. I wrote a book called, originally it was called What Are They Doing to Me? It was then recalled The A to Z of Therapies, and now it's back to What Are They Doing to Me? And at the time, and this book I wrote over 20 years ago, and I thought, well, let me put a list of all the psychological therapies in one book. And at that time, when I researched them all, there was about 80 to 100 therapies. And I only wanted to put one paragraph, so that didn't really fill the book. So I thought I'd look into all the other therapies that were going on around the world. And I stopped researching once I'd found 10,000 different regulated, named therapies. And I'm talking everything from acupuncture to zone balancing, A to Z of everything. And in the end, I only put 400 in that book, just 'cause it was just nice to fill one paragraph about everything. But everybody thinks that their therapy is the same, and everybody thinks that their therapy is different from somebody else's therapy, where most of the time the therapy is simply you listening to a client. A person
Uh-huh.
likes to listen. You know, I tell you a rather interesting statistic that a lot of people don't know. There's a high percentage of prostitutes, I think it's about 60% of prostitutes, that never have sex with their clients. They just paid to listen to them. And the person comes in, mainly male, and they say to the prostitute, "Oh, my wife won't do this," blah, 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 blah. And the prostitute sits there, because she's getting money just for sitting there doing nothing. So, you know, this idea of paid therapists has been around for a long, long time. People like to have somebody who listens to them without judgment and occasionally puts in some suggestions which they consider to be a good idea. You know, if we come back to sort of the starting point of your discussions here, where you were looking at people that commit suicide. Now, there's no one particular causal factor that you can put on suicide, but generally, and there's another interesting statistic, is that a high number of suicides completed are actually only accidents. In other words, the suicide is normally the last cry for help. Nobody's listening to me. Nobody cares. If I put a rope round my neck, then somebody might take notice, but they don't actually intend to kill themselves. They stand on the chair and the chair breaks, and the rest of it, as they say, is history. But in a lot of suicides, the underlying factor is loneliness in the person. Now, it may not be, I mean, we don't understand that, for example, in the entertainment business, with the last couple of suicides have hit that. But entertainers, honestly, are sometimes the most lonely people. I had a good friend of mine in the UK who was a pretty well-known entertainer. He made people laugh. He was on top of his profession. But when he came home, he sat down and cried his eyes out, because he couldn't live without somebody saying, "You're fantastic." So underneath all of that, there's often a tremendous loneliness. There's also a tremendous not understanding of who you are, and so on. So a lot of these suicides, yes, can be prevented. You know, in England, we have the Samaritans, which is a suicide prevention organization. You can just call the police and they'll put you through to the Samaritans, or you can call the hospital, or they've got their own number, and they're a dedicated group of people that, you know, you feel like suicide, you ring them straight away. You have it here, but it's not so well publicized, and it's not so
Yes.
sort of spread out across the whole country. It's just like if I was to say to you, who do you call for the police? I mean, I don't think I know what it is. It's 112, isn't it, or something? You should know the number for Samaritans immediately on top of your head. You know, you should just know it. We know it in England and other countries. So that's just tying you into what your subject started for.
Those are a lot of interesting facts and statistics you share, Dr. David, here. Now, I would like to. There are a lot of people who are showing, viewing us
Mm-hmm.
live, and they are wishing you good evening also. So I'll read
Mm-hmm.
out few of them. There is Sujan Nandi, Kuldeep Singh, Sandeep Sarkar, and Teja Tallai, Mansi Shur, Jayant is there. So they are wishing you good evening. And
Mm-hmm.
some of them have some questions also. Shall I pick one of their question?
Sure. Whenever you like.
So one is a question from Sujan Nandi.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking how to control our mind in any negative situation.
Well, that's an interesting question, you see, because the question actually has a question within it, and that is negative. You see, in reality, there is no such thing as a positive or a negative situation. Things just are. We, humans, we make them positive or negative depending on our history and what's gone on in our life. Now, if you are being confronted a lot by what you classify as negative situations, right? First of all, realize that they're not a negative, they're just a situation. How you respond to that situation makes it negative or positive. It's just like if I pick up a spoon, here is a spoon. I hope you can see that, right? Oh, I dropped it off the
Yeah.
keyboard. That's just a spoon. You can't say that's a good spoon because it's smiling at me. And you can't say, turn it around this way, you can't say that's a bad spoon because it makes me look fat. Now, remember what I just said. There's a good spoon because it's smiling at me. There's a bad spoon because it makes me look fat. But the spoon is just a spoon. It's nothing. It's not positive. It's not negative. My reaction to that. Now, I would look at it and say it makes me look fat because I know I'm looking fat and I can see it better. So it's actually me knowing that. But the spoon remains just simply what it is. Now, if I feel that the spoon is making me look fat, then I turn it round and I say, oh no, the spoon is smiling at me. We have a term for this in NLP. We call it reframing. We change the way that you look at something. But remembering from the starting point, everything just is. And we've got to sort of get away from this idea of things being good or bad, because they're not. They just are what they are. We humans are what make things good or bad. And so the same thing, there's no positive or negative. It just is. So the first bit then, coming to answering your question, the first thing is to say, okay, let me put myself into a neutral state. Now, old-fashioned psychology would say things like count to 10, take deep breaths and all that. But the problem is that normally that's too late. You've already lost your rag. You've done it. So you've got to start noticing what annoys you and ask yourself, why does it annoy me? Now, let's think of anything. A classic one that annoys me is when I'm on an aeroplane, which I haven't been on for a year, and I hope I'll be able to get on soon. But when I go on an aeroplane, and then a young lady sits behind me with a child who starts screaming the place down, screaming, 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 I get very annoyed. So I have to stop and say, wait a minute, why am I getting annoyed? What's going on here? Right? And then I start analyzing it. And the first thing I realize is one of the reasons why children's noises get on your nerves is because you can't turn it into a song. Now, what do I mean by that? If you've got an air conditioning unit going, your brain starts to harmonize with the tune and you soon block it out. But when you've got a screaming child that has no rhythm to it, it's up and down all over the place, your brain can't turn it out. So you have to say to yourself, hold, stop, put my fingers in my ears, really think about that. That's one reason. Another reason is also because it reminds you of when you were a child and screaming, couldn't get your own way and so on. So there's all sorts of reasons why things annoy us. Now, if we start with the premise that everything just is, everything just is, now we can make that decision. Do I want to enjoy it, or do I want to move away from it, or what I want to do? I don't have to go mad or screaming or shouting. I can just decide to enjoy it, reframe it, change it, make it look good for you.
That's
I hope
so
that answers.
wonderful. Yeah, I hope Sujan also get his answer. And this is a wonderful way of looking at things actually. Let it start from the neutral position.
Absolutely.
And there is one another question from Jayant. He asked, in India, to talk about mental behavior is considered a taboo. So, how to get people open up about this?
Well, there's one word answer to this: education. Education. You see that there are, not just in India, in every part of the world, there is a lot of fear about mental illness because people think you can catch it. People think that they're going to be murdered by these people. All sorts of, I mean, if I can just change this a little bit, maybe I think 50 to 100 years ago, there was a huge fear over leprosy, and leopards, people that had leprosy were stoned and killed and chopped up and got rid of because we didn't want it, until we eventually began to understand what it was and cured the disease. And now we don't get so many leopards around. Mental illness is about that, really, is you don't understand it. And, you know, especially somebody you know, and they suddenly click and do something very strange and very peculiar behavior. And you get worried about it and you get fearful about it. And when you get into what you might call villages, or people that sort of live together in a group, they don't like things that are not regular. And as soon as something becomes a bit irregular, that they're worried about it, and then they throw it out. And this happens not just in mental illness, but everything else. But mental illness is particularly because the fact you cannot see anything. You don't see, as I said earlier, horns growing out of the head, or you don't say, somebody changing completely physically. And so because of the ignorance breeds fear, and fear makes you want to do nasty things. The same thing is happening in a certain extent with the COVID-19. Now, a lot of ignorance is there around COVID-19. And because there's ignorance, there is fear. Now, when you educate people to get rid of the fear, I mean, first of all, even though you tell educated people this, they still have their fear. 80% of everybody in the world who catches COVID won't even feel a thing. It'll just be a sniffle and it'll be gone. So only 20% are actually having a problem. And of those, most of those are old people or people with comorbidities. Nearly everybody that dies of it are people that are going to die anyway. Now, I know that sounds a bit harsh to say that, but, we're all going to die anyway. But, any illness on top of an existing illness will make things worse. Now, at the moment, we're talking about COVID-19, but I can remember Spanish flu. I can remember Hong Kong flu. There's all sorts of different things that happen and will continue to happen. But for some reason, this year, 2020, and COVID-19, for some reason, has been blown out of all proportion. And people are getting incredibly fearful. And people are doing so much stupid things. I see it here. They decide, close this village because it's going to be a hotspot, and put the police outside and beat anybody up who tries to come in. And, it's just ridiculous, because it's not like you can build a brick wall around a virus and it won't go away. It'll just jump over it. Viruses will spread all the time and always have done. So, and one of the things that struck me about this is that the governments of the world haven't gone out of their way to educate people how to not get the virus themselves. In other words, how to increase their own immune system. Very few people talk about that. And yet, if your immune system is done very strong, you're unlikely to have a problem with any virus, let alone COVID-19. So again, COVID-19 is an invisible disease, and we're all petrified of it because we don't know if it's coming or not coming, and the only thing we can do is lock ourselves away like a hermit, and even then you might even get it as well from the most unexpected source. So that's why you're frightened of psychological disorders. You can't see them, you don't understand them, you don't know what they're about, you don't know if they're catching, you don't know if they're going to kill you, if somebody else is going to kill you. Ignorance. So education will overcome that.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, for explaining it so nicely. And I want to thank my viewer also. So many people are watching live now and sharing comments and thanking you for such a wonderful explanations. And Sujan thanks also because he gets his answer. And as a token of my thank you and gratitude, I requested Dr. David to become Santa. So he's going to share a few gifts at the end of the session. So stay tuned for it. So there would be a surprise for you all as well.
I have an unwritten rule, you see, especially in Goa. And that is once 3 people have called me Santa Claus, I go and have a haircut. But unfortunately now barbers are closed, so as much as you like.
So I caught you at the right time. You can't go out and have a haircut now.
No, that's right.
So, Dr. David, can NLP help in depression? And in simple
Yes.
term, for most of our viewers who doesn't understand NLP, so
Mm.
how it helps and how does it work? And the effect is permanent or it's temporary?
Okay. A lot of questions there in one. So let's start. NLP, Neural Linguistic Programming, is in simple terms the study of excellence. All right. What's good and how do you get good and how do you maintain good and so on. So when you come across somebody who's depressed, right, let's call depression, you can have any other illness, but somebody's got depression, it's no use saying to them, oh dear, how did you get that then? Oh, come on, buck your ideas up, be good, because it doesn't work. Doesn't work, right?
Hmm.
We know fully how to do depression. This is how to do depression. So the sort of questions I would ask, and NLP people would ask, is first of all, are you happy with this depression, or would you like it to go? And this is what we call outcome. You know, if they say, no, I don't want it to go, I'm happy like this, you know, Mr. Scrooge, you know, and Dickens' Christmas Tale, you leave them. So fine, okay, you can wallow in your misery and be happy in your misery. Of course, people are not going to say that. Then most of the time they're going to say, oh no, I wish I was my old self, or I'd like to be normal again. So what NLP would do is not say, how do you do that? Will you do that? I would say, well, when were you normal? What was it like when you were good? No? That's Mummy calling, I'm sure. Hello, Mummy. Is that phone you or is it somebody else listening?
Yeah, just a minute, just a minute. I'll just put it on a silent.
I'll carry on, you see. So
Yeah,
it's
please.
what we would say to the person is, can you remember a time when you were not depressed? Right? I mean, most people have times when they're not depressed. They don't get born depressed and live depressed all their life. There are times they're not depressed. And they would say, oh, maybe last week or last month or last year or whenever. They'd identify a time that we're not depressed. And then I would say, what were you doing then? You know, what were you doing that made you not depressed? Or conversely to that, what are you doing now that's making you depressed that you were not doing then? Right? Because something has happened. So what we do in NLP is we want to associate you to all the good things. What did you do then? Can we do more of that good thing? Now, often this sort of depression is created by something else. You know, well, I wasn't married then. Sorry, I wasn't married then. I wasn't depressed. Now I'm married. And I'm depressed. Or I didn't have any kids then. I didn't have any worry, and now I got kids. And so you can still go back and say, okay, well, when you weren't married and when you didn't have any kids, how were you feeling? And then you, if you like, extenuate that feeling and you do what we call in NLP as an anchor, which means like you touch yourself, like you can do with a ring. It's like, oh, yes, when I was single, oh, it was so lovely. Oh, yeah, I feel better now already, you know, and suddenly they're coming out of the depression. And when they've come out of the depression, then you can talk about ways to stop them going into the depression again. Look at what we call triggers in NLP. Trigger is like a trigger of a gun, yeah? Bang, bang. Something, you don't just suddenly say, oh, I'm feeling happy. Oh, I'm depressed now. Or, you know, it doesn't work like that. Something triggers you into depression. And when you can find what that trigger is, you can use that same trigger to trigger you into better behavior. So if I come back to what I said before, so now when I hear a child screaming on a plane, I think to myself, now here is a chance to try out my latest meditation technique to see if I can drown that person out in my mind. And, you know, so I've got an exciting thing now to check some other way of getting rid of that pain rather than just saying, oh, God, there's another screaming kid. So in NLP, we tend to look at what is good and what works. And what is and for you, what's worked for you in the past will probably work for you again. You know, then people get into this silly situation. Oh, I can't do anything about it. No. Well, of course you can. There are things called divorces. You can leave a job, or you can emigrate to another country. You can do all sorts of things. The fact of the matter is that the cure at the moment is more painful than the problem. While the cure is more painful than the problem, then the problem will stay. But once the cure becomes less painful than the problem, then you go. It's a bit like in relationships, when you have husbands and wives arguing and so on, and yet they're still staying together. I would say to them quite simply, it hasn't got bad enough yet. Because if it's got bad enough, you will leave. If I keep jumping on your foot and keep stamping on your foot and then keeping my foot on your foot, there will come a time when that's bad enough that you'll say, no, I've had enough. I'm out of here. I'm going away. Unfortunately, some people don't see that, and they think that they have to stay in that situation. They have to have the foot on their foot all the time. Their life, what's the great Indian expression for that? Karma. In a past life I was a terrible man or woman, and now I'm suffering from it. And it's just an excuse. It's just something that gives you a little bit of relief from your pain. But normally most of these things are self-afflicted. Maybe some people actually enjoy it quietly. Some of it. But it gets too much. It's like having a drink. You enjoy a nice little drink, maybe a brandy or a couple of beers, and that's great. And as long as you're enjoying it, that's great. But then eventually, over a period of time, you'll get too much and too much and too much, and then it'll take over. And then you'll say, "Oh, I can't give it up. I can't stop this. No, I can't." Because you convinced yourself you can't.
That is so true, actually. Until it is enough, we keep. Misery is also an addiction, actually, I think. Some people, it's difficult for them to get out of the bad situation. And until it reaches to the point that you can't bear it, then people look for solution. That's so
And
true.
there's another thing to add to that, because I see one of the questions you sent me is about India being in the top countries for suicides and so on. That may not necessarily be true, but what India is in the top of is not really taking a lot of notice. Because you've got so many people, you don't worry too much when a few people die. In other countries, any death is carefully and thoroughly examined. I don't think you even do post-mortems half the time. You may have people that have killed themselves because they can't stand the pain of cancer or something. So I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the reporting is not very good. And certainly the investigation is not very good, which is a bad thing, because if you get people, when I first came here, I noticed an awful lot of suicides in young people, which is what's happened now, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And unfortunately, although it's not a very nice thing to say, I have to say that a vast majority of those were down to the parents and the parents' inability to understand their children. Understanding children is a very difficult thing to do. I say to people, I run parenting programs from time. In fact, we're doing one in a few days' time, I think. But one of the things I say to parents is that your child should be your best friend. Now, your best friend will tell you anything. Now, imagine what happened if you go to your best friend and he or she says, "Oh, I smoked a reefer last night," whatever you call them, marijuana, cigarette, right? You wouldn't say to your best friend, "My God, you did what? Go to your room without any dinner." You wouldn't say that. You would say to your best friend, "Well, that was interesting. What happened? How did you feel? What went on?" You would discuss it like sensible people. But when it comes to a child telling you something, you go off the, "Whoa, terrible, awful." But if you create a situation where your child isn't your best friend, then they'll do things without telling you. They'll have problems and they won't tell you about them. But if your child is your best friend and they're having problems, they'll tell you, because they tell you just like they would tell their best friend. Unfortunately, if you haven't started this right with your children at the beginning, it's very hard to turn it back into the way it should be. but that, that trust and that understanding, because children will experiment with all sorts of things. And I'm not talking about drugs and so on, but they'll get a metal skewer and stick it through a worm in the garden and spin it round. All these sort of things that we as adults, but children will do that. They'll steal from you. They'll lie to you. They'll do all this because they haven't got the connections necessarily in their brain to understand everything. And if you, another, just an aside here, lying I think is a fantastic thing, because children will always lie. Normally around 6, 7 or 8, they'll come up with a little lie of some description, and it's how you react to it is how they grow out of it. But you see, what a lot of parents say, they say to their children things like, no, you mustn't lie. It's naughty. It's bad to lie. It's not the done thing. We don't do it in this society, and so on and so on and so on. And then the phone rings, and the child answers the phone and says to you, says, oh, it's Auntie Aggie on the phone. And you look at it, no, tell her I'm in the bath. Tell her I'm gone. Tell her something. And so you've just lectured the child about lying, and then you've told the child to lie. And we do this all the time. And then we start saying, oh, well, no, there's white lies and they're all right. And then there's black. It's nonsense. A lie is a lie. They have to understand, and they're going to go through it. They're going to go through it. So, coming this, why I talk about children is that unfortunately, a lot of mental problems that come up later are often connected with things that happened in childhood, either knowingly or unknowingly, because a child basically, when a baby is born, it's born with a full set of neurons but no connections. This is an easy way of explaining it. And as they go through life, the connections are made. And if those connections are made incorrectly in the early part of life, they stay incorrect for later life. And if you've got a whole lot of incorrect connections in your head, you're less likely to be able to work things out when problems arise. So, it starts with children, and bringing up children is something that nobody really knows how to do properly. It's amazing.
Yeah, now parenting is very important nowadays, because most of the suicides are happening with the young kids, students, and the young people. And right now, recently, the celebrities or the people who committed suicide, they achieved certain name, fame, and money also. Still, they went to commit
Well, because
suicide.
it's nothing to do with fame and money. It's to do with you. One of the guy that who lived in Mumbai, the actor, I was reading somewhere that he was actually quite lonely. He was living alone in that place in the middle of even though all the money in the world. They say money can't buy you happiness. I have a little trailer I add to that. I say money can't buy you happiness, but you're very miserable without it. But it really, the actual statement wasn't money doesn't buy you happiness. The actual original statement was the love of money doesn't buy you happiness, and the love of money is the root of all evil. That was the original statement, but the love bit has got missed out. But people, coming back to the children, a lot of parents think that they have to tell their child what that child has to do. You have to be an engineer, you have to be a doctor, you have to be this, rather than encourage what the child wants to do. Now, I know a lot of that is a bit of a problem with the educational system here. And in fact, I was saying this to somebody only fairly recently, in India, carpenters, electricians, and what we call tradespeople are the lowest of the low. They don't get a lot of money. They're not respected in any way. And yet in England, it's the opposite to that. In a building complex, in a building site, the carpenter is the top person, makes phenomenal amounts of money. And the carpenter often ends up being the site foreman or the site agent. And they're treated with respect. And there's a whole secondary type of education called vocational education, where if you're showing flair for artistic stuff or something with your hands and so on, then you develop that in the child. Here I know that exists within the structure, but it doesn't seem to fit in with the family issue. You know, this family has always been doctors, so you're going to be a doctor. You know, this family is always, and so you're going to be that. Even though the child is expressing interest in painting or playing the piano or kicking a football about or whatever. No, that's secondary. You're going to be this. And that puts a lot of stress and strain on the child. Um, I you know, this is coming back to knowing your child. Your child's your best friend, knowing what's going on and helping develop the child's natural talents, whatever they are. And the more exposure you give to a child at a young age of different things, the more they will develop better in certain directions. Anyway, we're going a little bit off subject here.
So,
But
Dr. David,
it's yeah.
yeah, parenting is a very important topic,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's an altogether separate topic to talk about, and we can talk hours on that also.
Mm.
So, I have another question from viewers.
Yes.
It might be a student who is worried about that how to cope up, with going back to work. Now we have been in a lockdown situation, not physically active. So how to deal with the time when we go back to the situation when it start to become normal?
Okay. Well, the first thing is you shouldn't have got out of normal to start with, right? Even though I stopped running courses and I'm doing a lot of stuff online, which is only a few hours a day, I still get up at the normal time. I go through my morning routine and so on, and I build myself into a routine of the day because routine is very good to keep you on track, so to speak. Now, if you've started, oh, I don't have to go to university or work, I don't have to do this, I might as well stay in bed and have a few more hours sleep in bed, then you end up sleeping until 11 and 12 o'clock every day as your norm. And then it becomes more difficult to start getting up on at 8 o'clock. So the thing is, when this happens, you have to, again, using NLP terms, reframe your life. You adjust your life to be able to make the greatest advantage of the new norm or the temporary norm. So you have an ability to look into subjects that you didn't know much about. I'm not talking about necessarily studying, because that sounds boring. But you might like to think, oh, I wonder what it's like to ride a horse. Well, now I've got a chance because I've got nothing else to do. I can find out what it's like to ride a horse. I can find out what it's like to do some of these things that I've wondered about in the past because I got the opportunity and the time. And especially now where we've got all this wonderful internet and you can almost find out anything. So I think it's coming back to disciplining yourself to the same routine as what you would do when you go to work or to school. And don't wait now until you're going to school tomorrow or you're going back to work tomorrow. If you're not working or you're not at school, start to put into your life already a routine that will easily mesh with when you're going back to school, even if it just means walking around the block. For example, if you leave to go for school or college at 7 o'clock in the morning, then at 7 o'clock in the morning, have a walk around your neighborhood and see what's going on, or do something so you get you into that routine. I think that anybody that comes through this lockdown period and has wasted it, come back to our subject, let's sort out what's going on in your head. You've got a wonderful time to do all sorts of things. I tell you, one of the things I do every day at around about 9:30 and then around about 4 o'clock, I spend a half an hour in the sun because the sun creates vitamin D. Vitamin D is one of the major fighters of viral infections and so on. And the darker your skin, the longer you have to stay in the sun to make the same amount of vitamin D. But that becomes a routine to look after my health. Take some time in the sun, then maybe a little time in the gym or, whatever. And in fact, Rana, who lives with me, who's my grandson, he's taken up cooking, and he's baking cakes, and he never would have done it before had it not been for this lockdown. And some people have actually obtained new skills in the lockdown.
Yes.
But if you think about it, it's all about that mental attitude, you see. Now, if the mental attitude is, I must find out what I can about all the subjects I'm interested in, as opposed to, oh, I got to go and be drilled into me all these boring subjects. If that's your attitude, then that's your attitude in lockdown. But if your attitude is one of, in NLP, we call it curiosity, not just accepting what things are happening, how do those things happening? Increase your curiosity, increase your understanding, and that will make you better for when you go back to your work or school and become
That
even
reminds
better.
me. That reminds me of this book, NLP for Curious. When I got curious, then I bought this one. So
Yes,
this is
yes.
one of the book Dr. David wrote.
But, we have a lot of people that are now studying NLP.
Yes.
One of the reasons is because we're doing it online, and it makes it easy for them to study in a few hours a day, and because it is an antidote to today's problems. Because there aren't any problems. The problems are manufactured by humans. There are no problems. I mean, the tree's still growing, the grass still needs cut, the dog still goes out and sniffs around and does his business. Only we change. We change. You can look at this in so many different ways. I mean, one of the classic people say, "Oh, yes, but the money is going everywhere. There's everything's losing money everywhere." Well, there's a very simple rule about that: is that money is not created or lost; it's redistributed. You're not getting hold of all the rupee notes and sticking them in the bonfire and burning them up. No, they're being redistributed. So there are people who are making so much money out of this lockdown period that you wouldn't even begin to imagine. And there are people that you don't even expect. I mean, the obvious ones are like, the internet programs and things like that. But there's certain foods that people are buying that they weren't buying before. There are certain things people are doing that they weren't doing before. So it's just really a matter of redistributing, because first law of physics says that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It's just merely
Yes.
changed and redistributed. And just as quickly as it's redistributed out of your pocket into Microsoft or Zoom's pocket, then when this is all turning around the other way, just as quickly it will start to come back into your pocket. And in fact, in the long run, you might do well out of it, because you're learning to live with things that you used to take for granted, like driving the car and so on. And if you can now live without driving a car, then you're helping the environment no end. In fact, I think Delhi has seen its cleanest air it's seen for many, many years. Other things are
Yes.
happening. The water is getting clearer, all sorts of, it's almost like the world is resetting itself. And it will do. And again, you can look on the good side or you can look on the bad side. That's entirely up to you. If you wouldn't to look, if it's time when we
So one another question, Dr. David, about the mindset of the people or the parents.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Malathi asked, is it true that we inherit the qualities from our ancestors? If negative qualities are taken, then how to remove them?
Okay. There's a very quick answer to your question, and that is yes and no. Okay. Yes and no. Now, we don't think that you actually inherit problems from grandparents. We don't think. You may do, but we don't think so. All right. Because you are born, if you like, with a clean slate. But what you do inherit, whatever way, if you use inherit as the right word, you inherit the way your upbringing is. In other words, as a mother or a father, what do you do? What's your reference for bringing up a child? It's the way you were being brought up. So quite often you will use the same things, rightly or wrongly. And if they're wrong, then yes, you're inheriting wrong ideas. So it's not so much some magical motion in your head that you're inheriting, but it's the concepts that you're inheriting. Now, there may be certain amount of inheriting through the genes, but we're beginning to understand more about genes. Before we just said, oh, it was the genes, but now we know that the genes are actually switches, right? You have millions of these little switches inside your body, which are called your genes, and they can switch on to something or they can switch off to something. And when they can easily switch on, we say you have an inherited tendency to. For example, in your genes, we can now notice whether you're likely to be alcoholic or not. We can notice if you're going to be allergic to something or not. And the way these genes switch on or off is via your environment. So we're now coming back to this old argument about inheritance or environment and so on. But in fact, it's both. So you could say that any child is born with the potential of being anything, right? And as the child grows with the influence of not just the family, but the friends and the living, the whole environmental structure, as the child gets exposed to this environmental structure, so its gene switches switch one way or the other, right? And once those genes have switched, it is more difficult to switch them back. Not impossible, it's just more difficult. So a lot of research is being done in this genetical field, and I'm sure it won't be long before you can take a pill to turn a gene off. You know, oh, I have a tendency to drink too much. I'll take this pill and it'll turn that gene off the other way. Or I get allergic to this. It's all of this is in your genes, and it's a very fascinating subject. It's becoming more and more interesting, and we're going to get to a stage where we can really control our genes, and of course the genes will also control your emotions. So it's what in NLP we've known it for a long time. We call it the mind-body connection, right? Your mind and body are integrally connected together. You can think yourself ill and you can think yourself well. The more you give up about something, the less you'll be able to do something. You know, you're trying to have you been trying to thread a needle, you know, when you can't do it and you go, yeah, just give up, and then you'll never do it. But if you just patience and find the way, you'll be able to thread that needle. And once you can thread the needle, you can always thread the needle. You know, once you've learned something, it's always there. You hardly ever unlearn something. You learn over it and you improve the way you do something, but you don't actually leave it. That's why my dogs are barking. I think one of my dog's girlfriend has visited, and they just remind me that every other relationship, you know, when the girlfriend comes and visit, all they do is shout at each other for the whole time the other girl is here. Mirroring society, I suppose. Yeah, so the gene will be a very exciting thing about the future.
So
And
it doesn't mean that NLP techniques also help changing the behavior. So in a sense, gene can be switched on and off using those
absolutely,
techniques.
your behavior can be changed. The first thing you have to know is what behavior to change. Then you have to have a desire to change the behavior. And then practicing the new behavior in a way is turning that gene switch a little bit more to the other way. And don't forget, when we're talking about genes, we're talking about microscopically small little things, you know, really, really, very, very tiny. So it doesn't require an awful lot of effort. And once you've made that effort and done something, you can always do it. You know, it's like riding a bike. I'm sure people ride bikes when they're a kid and maybe not ride a bike for 20 or 30 years, yet they can still get on the bike and ride it because it's wired into the brain.
Yes.
Now, there's a great film you can see, which I forget what it's called now, but it's about a guy who had a bike, an ordinary push bike, right? And they put a cog in the handlebars so that when you turn the handle to the left, the wheel went to the right and vice versa. And it took him something like 3 months to learn how to ride this bike. And he used to go all around the country and all around the world and offer anybody to ride the bike across the stage, he'd give them $100. And they all queued up to do it, but nobody could do it because it takes a whole lot of learning. Now, that was interesting in itself, but the really interesting bit was where somebody said to him, well, ride an ordinary bike. And he said, yeah, of course. He jumped on the ordinary bike and he couldn't ride it. It took him a couple of weeks to get back to riding it because of the way the brain has been rewired.
Changed.
And that's all it is. You change the brain, the body follows it. Change the body, the brain follows it. You know, if you start with lots of weightlifting, right, and you start building up the muscle, your brain says, I'm a muscular body. I can go and do shows. I can do, it just connects all the time. Brain and body connects all the time. We know this, for example, we talked earlier on about emotions, right? Now, here's a little exercise all of you listening can do, right? Very simple. Just think about your favorite sports team, or if you're not into sports at all, your famous opera, film, television you like, whatever it is, and come to a point in it where you get really excited, right? And you get really excited, you get your arms up in the air like this, you go, way, right? Now, freeze. Absolutely freeze your body in every description. So your hands are in the air, you've frozen the body, and now without moving your body at all, be depressed. Be depressed. Come on. You got to go, depressed. So your body and your mood are intricately tied together. That's why if you're good at a sport, if you're a runner or whatever you are, you get that high from that sport. You get that excitement. You enjoy it, right? And if you're no good at sport, you don't get enjoyment from it, but you get enjoyment from something else. Coming back to our depressed person, what is it that's going to make you happy? What is it? There's going to be something, because the depression is what we call depression in a sense as a suppression of anger or the emotion. You suppress it rather than let it out. And what you really want to do is go, I feel better now.
So it needs to, the old saying we used to hear in school, healthy mind stays in a healthy body, and the vice versa.
Absolutely. And you don't realize it's old-fashioned thinking, but it is so true. You get people that, not me, I'm only a septitarian, but you get people that are octotarian or nanogerian or centurion. Some of them active as hell. We had a guy in England called Captain Tom. You may have seen it. He was 99 and he started to raise money for the national health. So he started walking around the garden of his old folks' home, and he tended to raise a few hundred or a few £1,000s. He ended up raising £34 million by doing all this walking around. And his brain was so alert. He was very, 99 years of age. You get other people who are in their 70s and they go, oh God, I can't do anything.
Yes.
And the people that are active live the longer lives. I mean, look at the British royal family. The Duke of Edinburgh was 99 last week, and the Queen of England is 93, I think, or 94. And yet they're all over the place. They're active as anything. And the other people who give up at the age of 60. It's all part of the same thing. The mind and body are the same system. They complement each other. They work together. Before you can do anything, you have to think about it. Right? You can't do anything you don't think about it.
Yes. So this is a very basic thing to do. If you want to keep a healthy mind, then keep your body healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Combine the two. Combine the two. Develop interests. All sorts of interests you can develop, even at any age of life. Keeps your mind active. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you and have you here this evening. And thanks to our viewers also for joining us live this evening on weekend. I hope you also enjoyed this conversation with Dr. David.
I can say that if you're interested in how to bring up children properly, you can join our Zoom session on effective parenting. You can find all this information just by looking up my name on the internet. It'll turn up. But otherwise, you can send us emails. You can contact me any way you can. I'm not a difficult person to find. I have about 6 Facebook accounts and got over 5 million followers across the board of everything. So just put Dr. David Lincoln in your search engine, you'll find me. And we're running quite a lot of programs on the internet now, a lot of NLP programs. We've got some new ones planned for the future. We're looking at a relationship program, a psychotherapy program, and so on. And if you want to ask any questions, just feel free to drop me a line. Email is easy to find.
Yeah, on our banner also you can see the website and the
Yeah.
email ID of Dr. David and to
Yeah.
C2B coach also. So you can drop a message to us and we'll connect to Dr. David. And now comes the surprise.
Okay.
So anyone who registered with Dr. David for any course in next 2 months, they will get a free book of their choice of Dr. David.
Now, that is a surprise because I didn't even know that. Rana, who is the managing director of the company, he's probably sorted all that out. But yeah, we're happy to give you. I've written half a dozen books, so we're happy to give you a free book. That's great.
So get in touch with me to get the free coupon code to get the free book. And I'll post the listing of the book of Dr. David Lincoln on my page. So this is, and you can have, when you are joining for the course, you can get it personally signed by Dr. David as well. So that
I'm
will
doing
be
that as well. I'm too old to sign the books now. Okay, well, thank you. I get your name right, Meenakshi.
Oh, that's much better.
And I've lived in India for 15 years, but I still struggle with Indian names because they just don't register in my head. But I must thank her wonderfully for this session, and you can help her by supporting her channel. Details again, C2B. C2B Coach Gmail, and all these things are useful. You can help her, you can help me, we'll help each other. And just finally, if I might say, don't be strangers to your neighbors, don't be strangers to your extended family. People do need help, and sometimes they are too proud to ask for it. Just putting your head around the door or bringing a cousin or an auntie or something, how are you? I thought I'd just call you to say how you are. It all helps the happiness go round. So don't be strangers to each other. Don't be strangers to your family, and don't be strangers to your neighbors, and help.
Yeah, so say hi, hello to people you meet on the road or in the lift in your society or in the neighborhood wherever you are living. Talk to people, say hi, hello, and help each other out. Thank you so much for this wonderful evening.
And if you have any other questions, feel free just to send them to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. David, and thank you, viewers, for viewing our channel today. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
And thank you, Meenakshi, for your
that's
time.
much better.
I'm getting there slowly.
You're getting there.
And of course, thank you all to all the listeners and all the people that have sent all the questions in. I'm sorry we haven't got enough time to answer all those questions
Yes,
individually,
yes, yes.
but there are a lot of them, and wherever possible, I will answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye, all you people.